Welcome back into the Thomas Fitch Sports Show. As usual, I'm your host, Thomas Fitch. Texas football gets a huge win over the weekend, especially for saying they're not a football school. We'll talk about that and break down that game in a second. Also, we're going to look at what else happened in college football. This is the Thomas Fitch Sports Show. All right, so for those of y'all who missed it, last week prior to the USC game, Colin Cowherd goes on air and says Texas is not a football school. Well, tell you what, after beating USC 37-14, I say that's a pretty impressive win for a school that really doesn't care about football. Colin, tell me, 103,000 fans in the stadium, but it's not a football school. No. Texas football is the professional team of Austin, Texas. Austin probably will not get a major professional team because of the Texas Longhorns. But again, not a football school. Or should I say, not a football city. Because if you watch the clip when he was talking to Joel Klatt, which is a little background, so he's talking about schools like Texas, Michigan, who have a lot of wins, but he says they can't be football schools because they are good universities and have a good town. Now, in his opinion, Colin Cowherd's opinion, USC, a school that is in Los Angeles and a very good academic school, is still a football school, even though it's the same qualifications, he said, when talking about Texas. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You can say Texas is an elite. That's fine. Okay? Texas has not been playing great the last 10 years. They had a good 10-year stretch under Mac Brown from about 99 till 2009. They were good in the 60s. They're third or fourth, depending on if you talk about Notre Dame's vacated wins, third or fourth all-time FBS winning team. So you can say maybe they're not an elite team. They're not up there with Ohio State, Alabama as the best teams ever in college football. But they're absolutely a football school. Nobody cares about basketball games. 1 or 2 games a year, the Frank Erwin Center is almost packed. Almost. That's not a big stadium. Baseball games? People go to them. But 103,000 fans to watch Texas take down Colin Cowherd, your beloved USC Trojans, your football school Trojans. 103,000 fans. And that's not a football school? That's the dumbest thing I have ever heard. And for the most part, I agree with, not necessarily agree with Colin Cowherd, but of all the sports talk people in the business, the big ones, I usually don't have many problems with Colin Cowherd. I don't always agree, but I like the way he goes about things. But the way he was talking about Texas not being a football school, that's just dumb. That's incredibly dumb. And, all I'll say is the Horns responded in the right way, winning 37-14. So let's move on to that game. Big win. However, Horns fans, as Aaron Rodgers famously said, relax. RELAX, relax, Horns fans. Was it a great win? Absolutely. Was it against a good Power 5 team? Absolutely. But this USC team's going to have a hard time winning more than 9 games this season. They're a good team, but they have a young quarterback. They lost a lot of players last year. Good receiving core, I'll give them that. Great receiving core. But this is not a USC team that's going to challenge for the Pac-12 title. It's not a USC team that's definitely not a USC team that's going to challenge for a national championship. So the people who are out there saying Texas is back, no. Stop. Stop. Texas is not back. Are they back on the right track? Absolutely. Was it a almost must win? Absolutely. Going into conference play 2-1 is a lot different than 1-2. And it certainly helps momentum. And it absolutely helps recruiting. Already Texas got a 4-star running back. I assume more commitments are going to fall in the next couple weeks because of this game. But Texas is absolutely not back. USC, you look at their schedule before Texas, beat UNLV fairly handedly, but took them a little time to separate from UNLV. Lost to Stanford 17-3 the previous week 2. Like I said, they're good. They're not great. So relax. It's a good win. Enjoy the win. But this was not a huge win. It was a huge win. It was a huge win for the program, but it doesn't mean that This just flip the script. Texas is back. They're going to win the national championship or be in the national championship game for the next 10 years. No. However, like I said, they're back on the right track. So let's break down this game and talk a little more about it. Sorry for my voice. I'm just going to blame it on yelling at the USC game. It's probably allergies. But we'll start off with the offense like we always do. Again, slightly slow start. Go down 14-3. However, come back, score 34 unanswered points. Can't complain about that. And really, that's kind of my whole message about this whole game. There's not much to complain about. There's little things to nitpick. And I know Tom Herman was talking about it on Monday. Like, there were good things, but we got to focus. We got to look at what we did right, what we did wrong, and then move on from the game, which is true. You got a new team coming in. You're playing TCU next week, a really good TCU team who we'll talk about in a little bit, but who, went almost down to the wire with Ohio State. But, only a couple nitpicky things to complain about. For the most part, a great game. So, you look at this team, only one turnover, 4 punts, and 2 of those were in the fourth quarter after the game was over. Sam Ehlinger played a heck of a game. His stats are going to be misleading. He was 15 of 33, 223 yards, and 2 touchdowns. The 15 of 33 isn't great, but he had a lot of times where he's rolling out, just throws the ball away, and there were some drop passes. So, and at the end of the day, Texas wins 37-14. When you're the starting quarterback, you put 37 points on the board. Only 7 of those points were defensive scores. You can't complain and be like, "Oh, time for Buechele," because I've heard people talking about that. Yeah, Sam's okay. He's 4-6 but he's only 4-6 as a start. I don't care. He just beat USC. He's looked solid these first 3 games, and he's doing things that Shane can't. I still think at this point he's as accurate of a quarterback as Buechele is. A lot of people disagree. Buechele may be a tad bit more accurate, but he doesn't have the mobility, and he just doesn't have the it factor. And that is something that some quarterbacks have, some don't. Look at Garrett Gilbert. Garrett Gilbert looked like a great quarterback. He was a 5-star, looked great in practice. He didn't have that it factor, and therefore wasn't a good quarterback. Cole McCoy was he's the 3-star quarterback coming out of high school. I would say probably not. He's not the best quarterback. He's maybe the best true quarterback that's played for Texas, but, he had a good arm. He was decently accurate, but he wasn't anything to write home about. There's a reason he's just a backup in the NFL and he's never done anything as a starter. But why did he win at Texas? Because he had that it factor. He knew how to win games. The best quarterbacks in college football know how to win games. The best quarterback, Tom Brady's not the best quarterback, but guess what? He knows how to win games. He's also a pretty dang good quarterback. But the point is, he knows how to win games. Sam Ehlinger knows how to win games. I know you say, okay, he's 4-6 as a starter, but he still's put Texas in those games. Shane Buechele has not put Texas, since he's been starting, the only game that Texas has been close in, and he's really looked good in, is the Notre Dame game, and the Notre Dame team that ended up not being that good. When Shane started last year, started against Maryland, weren't close in that game, started against TCU, blown out in that game. And, I realize that he's more experienced. I realize that he may be a little bit more accurate. But to me right now, Sam Ehlinger has this team 2-1. Another thing that I really noticed, he's absolutely the leader of this locker room. And it has been since Colt McCoy that the Horns have had a leader like that in the locker room. A guy that everybody looks up to, everybody respects, a guy that can take control and say, hey, guys, we're in this game. We're going to go out there. We're going to win it. That hasn't happened since Colt McCoy, and that's one reason that the Horns have struggled, is the lack of a leader, especially at the quarterback position. Shane doesn't have that. Sam absolutely has that. He has that it factor. People also got to remember, he's a true sophomore. He is a true sophomore. First of all, you look at Colt McCoy, wasn't great his first 2 years, but he was also a redshirt. And so the fact that Ehlinger is just a true sophomore and he's playing this well, there's no reason to play anybody else. Looking at the wide receivers, really, I think this is the game I've been most satisfied as far as all the receivers, especially Colin Johnson, finally finally just playing up to his ability, because we know he's an incredible athlete. 6 receptions, 79 yards. A lot of that was in the first half, and it was like the team finally remembered that he's tall and athletic. and they just threw it up to him. Going down the field, threw it up to him. Guess what? He caught the ball because he's tall and he's a great receiver. Little Jordan, also a great game. 4 receptions, 84 yards, the biggest of which coming on a 47-yard touchdown reception. And the catch was like a 5-yard catch, then he turns it into 42 more yards and a touchdown. And that's why Colin Johnson, I like going down the field. Little Jordan, you just got to get the ball in the guy's hands because he's so athletic. He's so big. He's so hard to bring down. Just get the ball into his hands. Give him a little bit of space. He's going to go off and score a touchdown or something. And so those guys showing their studs. Another thing about just the passing game in general, last week, again, I had said the team kind of very conservative in their play calling, not taking a lot of shots downfield. They finally took shots downfield. And granted, they didn't hit all of them. Sam didn't hit all of them, but it opened up the running game. And another thing, I think he had 2 or 3 throws to Duvernay that were incomplete, but they were against good coverage. You can't complain about that. One of them went like right through Duvernay's hands. The point is, Sam is throwing the ball on the money now down the field, and he didn't have that last year. So he's, again, showing that he's improved in accuracy. He's shown development. Buechele's never really shown development. Again, I've said this probably 5,000 times on the show. His best game was the Notre Dame game, his first game. He has gone downhill from there. And it's not like a steep downhill, but it is downhill. Eleanor's gone up, and he has a lot more room to go up. But yeah, the Horns go down the field a lot in that game, and that opens up the running game a ton. Because even if you're not completing the throws, it's showing, hey, look, they can do it. And the fact that Sam was putting the ball on the money, there was just defenders there. They're saying, okay, if we're bringing in blitzes, we're packing the box, and they get an open guy, it's a touchdown. And so that completely opens up the running game. Obviously, Horns playing without Keontae Ingram for this game, but Daniel Young, Trey Watson the starting. Daniel Young stepping up well in that spot. Danny, 12 carries, 57 yards, averaging 4.8 carries. He's just a beast. Old school running back. Give him the ball, lower his head, let him just boom, run right through guys. And that's so much fun to watch, in my opinion. The one worry about him, he did have one fumble, and that's the kind of thing that fumble happens, and Deontay Foreman had the same problem. When you're a big guy and you're hard to bring down and you keep your feet moving, and because you're still moving, the refs aren't blowing you down, there's just a lot more time for defenders to get in there and just try to rip the ball out. And that happened on the fumble. He was, trying to stretch a 2-yard run into like a 7-yard run, keeps pushing up the middle, the ball pops out. That happens. I do think that's a reason why he hasn't gotten as much playing time for how talented he is Herman said this before, but if you're a running back and you can't hold on to the ball, you're not playing. There's a reason Tonio Carter hasn't gotten any touches this season. It's because he fumbles a lot. He's a great athlete, great pass catcher out of the backfield, but he fumbles a lot. And because of that, he's not getting a lot of playing time. Trey Watson, also a great game, 8 carries, 72 yards, 4 yards a carry. And he's proving to be a great player, great addition. He was the grad transfer from Cal. But running game really impressive. I was a little worried about the running game coming into this week, just looking at how USC's defense had done. But really, it was those deep passes that opened up the ability to run up the middle, run on the sides, and really open up the run game. And that's why the team did so well. O-line played pretty well. Obviously, run blocking, pass blocking was good. If you score 37 points in a game, the O-line's playing well almost every time. And there's a couple bad drives where they forced Sam to scramble, gave up 2 sacks. But, other than that, they gave Sam a lot of time in the pocket. Team ran for 140 yards. It's a great job by an offensive line that was still missing Shackelford, still missing Patrick Hudson. So you're without 2 of your starters, and O-line still playing great. That's the development that last year I was saying we need development out of the D-line. The O-line. Because the O-line was not great, and the only player you brought in who was really going to be starting week 1 was Calvin Anderson, who, by the way, has played good. But a lot of good development because this was a team that last year there was a lot of early injuries, and so you kind of saw what was going to be there next year at the end of last year, and there hadn't been much development. The O-line stunk as much as it did at the beginning of the season as it did at the end. But a lot of development this year, and that's awesome. Heck of, big shout out to Herman's coaching staff, Tim Beck, Herb Hand, all those guys. But yeah, 34 unanswered points by the offense. That's incredible. But that also happens because the defense plays great. So let's look at the defensive side again. Kind of slow start. They give up touchdowns on the Trojans' first 3 drives, but to let them score on 2 of their first 3 drives and then not let them score again, that's incredible for any defense to shut a team out. And I mean, not even just the last 3 quarters, but that was more than just the last 3 quarters. And a good team with a good quarterback. I know he's young, but he's still good. And that was impressive. And one thing that this defense, I feel like even last year when they were really good, one thing that they're really good at is bending and not breaking. Obviously, there was the goal line stand, there was the field goal block, and all of those things, that's a huge factor of a good defense. Because you're not going to, teams are going to have big plays against you. But if you can lock down and be like, hey, they gave up a big play, but that's okay. And Herman talked about this in the press conference about guys, I think it was like Brandon Jones, he gets blown on a play and, 2 or 3 plays later, he's making a big tackle on 3rd down. And he's saying these guys have so much confidence in themselves that they can miss a play and be like, hey, that's okay. I know I'm going to go 1-0. Obviously his whatever, but I'm going to go 1-0 on the next play. And that's huge if you can have a defense who can just be like, you know what, we messed up, we're getting right back in there. Especially with these with college age guys, a lot of defenses, they start struggling, they lose momentum, and teams just start scoring on them left and right because they picked up a first down on the first play of the drive. But instead, this defense is saying, hey, you get to our 30-yard line, we're going to buckle down, stop you, force you to a field goal where we have a good chance of blocking it. Because this team, it was cool to see them finally block one because the whole season they've been really close to blocking field goals, extra points by Maryland and Tulsa. So for them to actually block one, perfect timing, the right game to finally do that. But that was awesome. And so hats off to Todd Orlando, really getting this defense ready to play this week and really getting them, down 14-3. They've scored 2 of the first 3 drives instead of giving up and being like, okay, our only chance of winning is the offense is going to have to go off, is saying, hey, no, we can have a role in this game. We're not going to give them any more points, and we trust the offense to put up points. So that was huge. Now, again, like I said at the beginning of the game, or at the beginning of the podcast, you do have to remember this isn't the best offensive team, USC. It's a freshman quarterback on the road. They scored 3 points against Stanford the week prior, but regardless, holding them to no points after the first 2 touchdowns, that's incredible. And one thing that really excited me was the fact that this team could finally get sacks. 3 sacks in the game, finally dialing up some pressure by Todd Orlando. And I think a lot of the reason that Orlando was more comfortable to dial up the pressure was because, A, you're playing against a freshman quarterback, and B, you're playing against a freshman quarterback who's not that mobile. So you bring pressure, he doesn't really know what to do. You force bad plays, and you get sacks. So really cool to actually see the front 7 have a big influence in this game. As far as the young guys, they're still looking really good. Caden Stearns blocked the field goal. That was crazy. B.J. Foster, I don't know if y'all have seen that hit. He just ended a USC wide receiver. Got called for targeting. Ticky-tack call. I really haven't looked back at it in much detail. Kind of hard to tell on the Jumbotron, but it was a heck of a hit. And it wasn't even like, going low like that. I mean, it was USC receiver coming in, B.J. Foster just standing upright, just boom, kind of like lifts up his shoulders a little bit, and USC guy just pancaked on the ground. B.J. Foster is going to be a beast. I mean, I remember in the Under Armour All-American game in January, he was laying out hits, and I just remember saying, he's about to cause some damage. And probably I actually said that. I might have said it on the podcast. I was like, he's probably going to get 1 or 2 targeting calls and be ejected from a couple games this year. Who cares? Well, I mean, at this, okay, you never want a player to get ejected, and you never want them to have hits that are affecting the safety of other players. But if you're big, clean hits that sometimes the refs are like, because targeting is such a subjective call, I thought his hit against the USC guy was as clean as he could do from his position. He stayed straight up. He might have led with his helmet a little bit. It was really more shoulder, but it was to the head of the USC guy. The problem was he was just standing up, and because he's just such a beast, he just knocked the guy down. And as of this point, it's not a huge deal because he's backing up Brandon Jones. Brandon Jones will get the start. He's out for the first half. Foster's out the first half of TCU, but Jones will get the playing time then. So it's not a big factor, but he and Stearns are going to be really good. And also another freshman I meant to talk about in the offensive segment, Joshua Moore, just an incredible touchdown catch, diving catch in the end zone. So freshman looking really good. Also, I don't know why it took me till then to talk about this. Texas defense held USC to -5 rushing yards. That is crazy good. -5 would be impressive against against a Tulsa, against a San Jose State, against UAB, one of those Rice, whatever. It'd be really good against a group of 5, non-power 5 team. But against an FBS team, a ranked FBS team, holding them to -5 rushing yards, that's incredible. Incredible job by the front 7 there. Hats off to Todd Orlando getting his guys ready to play, because the Horns have kind of struggled with stopping the run. And that was one thing I said last week was the question is, and what the game is going to come down to was, could the Horns stop the run? Well, they stopped the run, and they went 37-14. Questions? But yeah, -5 yards of rushing in a whole game. That's incredible. We'll talk about special teams real quick. Dicker the kicker can actually kick. That's awesome. 3 of 3, 246 yarders, heck of a first game kicking field goals. And it's just exciting as a Texas fan to have, granted it's one game, but he looked good. And when our past kickers, even when they've been making field goals, they look ugly. They're low line drives, easily blocked. Dicker looked pure. Good height on the ball, good distance on the ball. It just feels good as a fan to finally have a kicker who can consistently make field goals, who you can trot out on the field and you're not saying, well, there goes 3 points, or they're going to block this and run it back for 7 points. So that's really exciting. Like I said, we're a Dicker the Kicker for Heisman podcast. So we're going to start the Heisman train now. It may not be till senior year that he gets the Heisman, but I think at least by next year he's going to New York. I think. My prediction. Ryan Bachevsky, not a great game. Not a bad game. 4 punts, 145 yards, 36.3 yards per punt. However, got a huge penalty, got a roughing the kicker penalty on a 4th down punt that gave the Horns a first down. Granted, they didn't do anything with that, but still, that's pretty cool. It's always helpful to get one of those, and it's nice to see him taking one for the team. I would say don't expect much growth in Bachevsky this year. I think the growth with those guys happens in the offseason. I think he can get his average to about 40 yards a punt by the end of the season, but I think, he still has 2-3 years until he's at his peak. Junior, senior year, I think Bachevsky and Dicker, people are going to call him the best kicking punter combo in college football. So bold predictions here. I don't even think that's bold. That's Bachevsky's I wouldn't say but he's about and maybe a little past where Dixon was his freshman year. Dicker's looking great his freshman year, both true freshmen. So watch out for those guys in a couple years. Watch out for Dixon next year. He'll be in New York. Bold prediction. We talk a little bit about the TCU game next week, or this Saturday. The question for this team, and I know Herman's talked about it, and he said the team's doing a good job of it. The question is, how well can they actually move on from the USC game? How well can they say, okay, good win, we look good, but now we need to move on and focus on the TCU game and put the USC game out of our head. We can look at highlights. We can say, hey, we did this good. Let's keep doing that. We did that bad. Let's grow from that. But then we're on to TCU. If the team can do that, if they can be as focused, as motivated as they were against TCU, good chance they beat, at least, or in a close game with TCU. Like I said, TCU in a close game with Ohio State over the weekend lost 40-28, but led the game for a long time. But I think TCU has some vulnerable spots. A young quarterback on the road. Again, that's the same thing I said last week against USC. Was a young quarterback on the road, and obviously Texas saw that last year with Ellinger struggling on the road as a young quarterback. And so again, that's why I'd love to see Orlando dial up a lot of pressure against him, force him to make mistakes. Other thing, they are a really fast team. Another thing Herman talked about, fast running backs, fast receivers, really fast defense. He said the key is you can't let them get behind you. And they had one of their running backs had like a 93, 94-yard touchdown run. This has to be one of the most disciplined games this Texas team will play this year for them to win, just because of the speed. If you're out of position slightly, that's a touchdown. You get burned, And so this team needs to be dialed in. They need to be locked in. They need to be disciplined on defense. And on offense, they just need to play smart. I would like to see them spread the field out like they did last week. I think if they spread the field out, they go deep, they throw to the middle, they run up. That's going to open up the running game, which in turn will open back up the passing game. If they could do that, go with the hurry up. The hurry up worked very well against USC. USC was all out of sorts whenever Texas ran the hurry up on offense. So if they can keep that going, but again, in order to get the hurry up going, you have to have good offensive momentum. And you have to have a good drive to get hurry up going. So if Texas can do that and really just stay disciplined, minimize penalties, they did a fairly good job of that. I'd say an improved job of that against USC. Still not great, but a much better job. If they can keep doing that, play disciplined, I think there's a chance they come out of here with a win. TCU a 3-point favorite. I think there's a chance the Horns at least cover that. I know it's hard. TCU has really had Texas's number. They've won 5 of the last 6 matchups since they joined the Big 12. They've won 4 in a row. But and the other thing is none of those games have been close. TCU has just blown Texas out. But I do think this will be close. I definitely don't want to say Texas wins this, but I do think that it'll be a close matchup, and I think the Horns have their best chance in the last couple of years of coming out on top. So we'll see. Anyways, coming up after this, we're going to talk a little college football, and I'll give my top 4 playoff predictions. All right, so let's talk college football for a little bit. Again, we'll just kind of break down conference by conference, and then I'll give my Thomas Fitch Sports Show top 4 college football picks. So we're going to start with, again, I still think the best conference as of now, SEC. First off, LSU kind of proves that they are legit. Big road win against what I still think is a solid Auburn team. Jared Stidham's still very good, very experienced quarterback. So definitely Auburn definitely not out of the college playoff contention, but huge win for LSU on the road. Wins on a last-second field goal, and kind of I would say kind of you put that win, you put the Miami win together, and this LSU team looks really legit. Definitely has a chance to contend. The problem for them is they're in a division with Alabama. And if they want to win the college football playoff, they have to beat out Alabama for the playoff spot. And Alabama looks really good. They beat Ole Miss 62-7. 62-7 against a conference Power 5 foe. That's insane. This Alabama team is on another level right now, especially offensively. I know they've struggled defensively, but 7 points to an Ole Miss team with a pretty decent offense, that's really good. Georgia also looked good. They beat Middle Tennessee State 49-7. And the reason I'll talk about later when I'm kind of breaking down my top 4, but why I think Georgia has a better chance of making the college football playoff right now is simply the fact that they are in a different division than Alabama. And at this point, if Georgia's undefeated going into the the SEC title game, they can lose to Alabama and they're still absolutely in the playoff, provided Alabama's undefeated, one loss, something like that. And so that's where they have the advantage right there. And I think you can just about say the four teams, LSU, Auburn, Georgia, and Bama, SEC is going to be won by one of these four teams. Everybody else kind of quit competing. Y'all are competing for whatever the fifth SEC bowl game is. But all those four teams looking really dominant. Obviously a tough loss by Auburn, but they're still a really good team. Really, really good team. Really excited for the LSU-Alabama game, really excited for the Auburn-Alabama game. Both of those should be really good. But it's just hard to think that anybody's going to beat Bama at this point, or at least beat them, or keep them from going to the title game, the SEC title game, and keep them from being in the college football playoff. There's no reason to say it's going to happen or there's no reason to say Alabama won't be in the title game, won't be in the college football playoff until they're consistently not doing it, because year after year after year they're there, and the dynasty still goes on. This is the scariest thing about this Alabama team. They're really young. A lot of young talent playing, especially offensively, which is where they've really succeeded. But even defensively, they lose a lot of guys. But when you're bringing in so many 5-stars year after year after year, that's why this is such a dynasty. And you hate to see it as a fan of anybody else but Alabama. But at this point, it's hard to argue that anybody else is going to win the SEC, or at least be in the title game. Moving on to the Big Ten, I would actually say I just kind of used the same order I used last week. I would say at this point the Big 12 is looking a lot better than the Big 10. Put them as the second best conference right now, but we'll start with the Big 10. Not a good week for them. Wisconsin's the biggest loss. Obviously Ohio State, Michigan win, but Maryland loses. Rutgers got killed by Kansas, and Maryland's loss was to a Temple team that was 1-2, lost to like Villanova and some other team that they, small team, like an FCS team. Nebraska loses to Troy. So Big Ten, as far as depth-wise, not looking good. If I'm Ohio State, I'm feeling really good about my chances to be in the college football playoff and be in the Big Ten title game. Michigan, I still don't see enough out of this team, out of the Michigan team, to say comfortably that they can contend for the Big Ten title. I think Wisconsin will still be in the Big Ten title game, just because they're in a weaker division. I think Penn State's door is a lot more wide open. After that, the close game against Appalachian State, I had just about ruled them out, but they're still undefeated. They're still looking really good. They have McSorley. They have a veteran quarterback, and like I've said hundreds of times, that's what it takes in this league association, if you want to call it, whatever. That's what it takes to have a good team, and so I think Big Ten is really down to whoever wins. Again, I don't know if it's league and whatever, legends and whatever it is. Whoever wins, Ohio State and Penn State's, between them two, whoever's in the Big Ten championship game, I think will be in the college football playoff. I think this one just about takes Wisconsin out of it. They have a chance, but they're going to have to be really dominating the last couple games or the rest of the season. They can't lose another game. But the problem is the style of football they play is not dominating. I mean, it is dominating as far as they're just going to run and run and run over and over and just kind of pound at the D-line and just wear you down. But they're not going to be beating teams, 62-7, even if they're playing at a really good level. And so Wisconsin's going to have to win out, look really good whenever they're playing ranked teams, and probably have a big win in the Big Ten championship. Moving on to the Big 12, pretty good week for the Big 12. OU survives a road test against Iowa State, which, it shows up. I think you look at that game, you say, okay, OU has a really good offense. Kyler Murray's legit. He could contend for a Heisman. You also say Iowa State's pretty good too. 27 points, only lose by 10 to OU. We're really in that game the whole time. So, again, we don't like to say there's much, there's really such thing as a moral win. But for Iowa State, that's definitely a moral win. and I think they could be a scary team. Fortunately, Texas has them at home this year. Um, let's see. Oh, Oklahoma State. That they had a big win against Boise State at home, just about a blowout, I would say, and that shows that they are a legit Big 12 contender. Um, TCU loses, but like we've talked about, lost in a pretty close game, 40-28 against Ohio State, but they were in the game just about the whole time, had the lead for a large part of the game, and so I think it shows. Okay, this TCU team not a national contender, but definitely a conference contender. West Virginia didn't play because of the delay. Obviously, Texas wins, so at this point, I can look at the Big 12 and feasibly say, okay, Oklahoma, Ohio State, TCU, West Virginia, and Texas really all have chances and all can feasibly contend to be in the Big 12 championship game. And teams like Iowa State, if there's a lot of kind of chaos in the conference, a team like Iowa State could make it there, or at least have a solid 8-win season. So I think the Big 12 is going to be a really competitive conference this year again, and not necessarily SEC level, just because you look at the SEC right now. They have 4 teams who you could argue all 4 of those teams, Georgia, Alabama, LSU, Auburn, could all have a case for the college football playoff. At this point, it's really just OU and West Virginia in the Big 12 that can argue that, but still, top to bottom, exclusion of Kansas, Baylor, and Kansas State, and even Tech. Yeah, I would say those 4 teams, Kansas, Baylor, Tech, and Kansas State. Other than those 4 teams, the other 6, I feel like, can really beat anybody. And Iowa State proved that they could almost beat OU. So Big 12 definitely going to be a fun year for watching that. Pac-12 had a kind of rough. Oh, not as rough as Big 10, but Arizona State loses to San Diego State. USC loses to Texas. Utah loses, granted, to a conference opponent, but big losses there. At this point, it's really Washington, Stanford, and no one else. I don't really see anybody else contending. I thought Utah could have a chance. I thought Arizona State could have a chance, and I'm not saying these teams don't have a chance to contend to an extent, but they're definitely Washington and Stanford are the Pac-12's only chance of getting a team in the college football playoff. Washington, pretty big win against Utah just because Utah's a solid team, but Utah lost that game. Washington didn't win that game. Utah had they're down 2 touchdowns. Washington's quarterback throws an interception. Whoever dropped the computer, but whoever defender did not drop the computer. I dropped the computer. But whoever the Utah defender was picks him off, starts running for the end zone about the 10-yard line. The ball just squirts out of his hands, out of bounds, and then Utah ended up not even scoring. And there was about 10 minutes left in the game, and would have made it a 1-score game, but they blow it. Then they can't, defender blows it, offense can't put it in. And so, yeah, Washington won that, but Utah really should have at least made it closer. Stanford, you look at Stanford, they beat UC Davis 30-10. And that's not super convincing. As a team that struggled with San Diego State, clearly a San Diego State team that we're seeing is decent. Didn't beat Utah or USC very convincingly. However, they have a big matchup against Oregon. That's actually where College Game Day is going to be. And I think that'll be very telling as far as what who is legit in the Pac-12. And that's kind of what I said last week as far as the LSU Auburn game. And what it showed is both teams are legit. LSU just happened to make it out of there with the win. But as of right now, Pac-12 is down to Washington and Stanford. ACC still on. When I say underperforming, Miami got a win, Clemson got a win, Virginia Tech didn't play, Boston College got a win, but there's just, other than those teams, there's no one. I mean, Florida State got destroyed by Syracuse. So maybe it's not the ACC that's a train wreck as much as it's Florida State, who's an absolute train wreck. I don't know what's going on there. The team doesn't seem to like each other. They're losing by a lot of points to Syracuse. This is a team who you look at their schedule. I don't know if they win many more games this season. This could be a 2-3 win Florida State team, which would be crazy. Looking at the rest of the conference, still Clemson, Virginia Tech, by far the favorites of the conference. However, still got to watch out for Boston College. I've said they're a sleeper since week 1. They're now ranked in the top 25. And I think they could play spoilers to ACC favorites. Here's an interesting little hot take. It's possible, so they play Virginia Tech week 9. It's possible they're still undefeated when they play Virginia Tech, which would make for a heck of a matchup. And who knows if Virginia Tech will still be undefeated at that point. But let's look at their schedule before they play Virginia Tech. Rutgers, who, if Kansas can beat Rutgers, anybody can beat Rutgers. Temple, who, yeah, they beat Maryland, but they also lost to Villanova. NC State, who has 2 not convincing non-Power 5 whatever wins. Louisville, who got killed by Alabama. And their other 2, same thing with NC State, their other 2 non-conference games have been kind of sluggish and ugly. So very reasonable to think that Boston College could be undefeated going into Virginia Tech, and then they play Clemson the next week. So I would not go so far as to say, okay, Boston College is a playoff contender at this point, but I do think that they could contend for the ACC just because there's not much competition in the conference. And that'd be really cool to see just because, A, it'd be cool to see Boston College do something. They haven't done anything since Doug Flutie. And B, because I, said they were sleepers week 1. Miami fans watching this, I don't think there are any Miami fans because there's like 5 people watching this. But still, if there's any Miami fans watching that saying, hey, what about us? We're still ranked. We lost to a really good LSU team. Yeah, Miami could definitely contend, but, at this point, they got blown out by LSU. I know they ended up putting away, who did they play? Was it Toledo or Tulane? Whoever they played, it was a close game for a while. They ended up putting them away. But just a lot of question marks with this Miami team. And also, saying Boston College is a sleeper to win the ACC. If they don't win the ACC, it's like, whatever. I said they were a sleeper. If I say, Miami could contend and they don't win, you're like, you just said the U is back. And they're a big program. So Boston College looks better on your resume. And if you bring that out, it's like, dang, look at this dude. He's pretty cool. He picked Boston College. So I just think there are a lot of question marks with Miami to be answered. They will get answered at some point, probably, hopefully. But at this point, it's Clemson, Virginia Tech favorites, probably the only 2 teams who could feasibly make the college football playoff. But Boston College could be spoiler. We'll talk about Notre Dame real quick. I was almost right in calling the Vanderbilt upset. That would have been really cool. I'm also a Vandy fan, so that would have been really fun for me. But it definitely shows that Notre Dame's beatable. They win by 8 against Ball State. They win by 5 against Vanderbilt. Teams that, if you're going to be a national contender, you've got to put away and you've got to beat them. But, I say that, you look at Clemson from a couple years ago, Florida State the year after Jameis Winston wins the Heisman. Both of those teams had a lot of ugly games. A lot of, beating Syracuse by 3 or losing, that kind of thing, where you're barely winning those games. But the best teams find ways to win. And if Notre Dame can keep finding ways to win, granted they're going to I think they have Stanford, they have some other big names, but, if they're just one of those teams that can find ways to win, they could definitely they're still undefeated. Definitely find a way in the college football playoff. But as of right now, I wouldn't pencil them in there just because of those close games. So right now, the Thomas Fitch Sports Show college football playoff. That's a lot of acronyms. TFSS, CFP, top 4. Bama number 1. No reason to change them. Actually, I don't think this changed at all. Georgia number 2, Ohio State number 3, Clemson number 4. I think the AP poll is Clemson over Ohio State, but Ohio State a bigger win than Clemson did this week, and I think they are a better team than Clemson, and have a much better strength of schedule. As far as teams on the outside looking in, to teams that could definitely still contend, OU, they just need a big win. They haven't really played anybody big. They played FAU, they played UCLA, who's Power 5 but not a good Power 5 team, and they played obviously Iowa State last week. And they'll have big games coming up. The key for them is they just got to win those games. I still think it's going to be tough for a one-loss Big 12 team to make it in, especially because you can lose a non-conference game or an early conference game and still make it into the college football playoff. But when you get to the end, losing games it's hard to make it into the college football playoff with a loss at the end of the season. And so OU, West Virginia, gonna have to play good down the stretch. Another team outside looking in Washington. I just say that because I think the Pac-12 is weak. I think they can kind of cruise through it. I still think that they're a better team than Stanford. The fact that they were in a close game with what I think is a really good Auburn team proves that. The other team on the outside looking in LSU. And like I said, the only reason I don't have them in the top four because I think they're that good of a team is because they still have to make it through Bama to make it to the SEC title game. And there's no way the SEC could get 3 teams in. I think Georgia cruises to the SEC title game. And so because of that, it's just going to come down to can they beat Bama or can they at least somehow beat Bama out for the SEC title spot. So that'll do it for that. A lot of football left. Conference play starting to get started. It was redundant, but it is getting started. Texas faces TCU next week. So we will be back here same time next week recapping that game. Hopefully another win. Anyways, from the Thomas Fitch Sports Show, I'm Thomas Fitch. Hook 'em horns.